The American Civil War didn't erupt overnight. It was the result of years of rising tensions, political battles, and violent conflicts that pushed the nation to the brink. From bloody skirmishes on the frontier to controversial laws that deepened the North-South divide, the road to war was paved with moments that shaped the course of American history. But how did events in the Old West play a role in this national crisis? In this video, we'll explore 9 key events that set the stage for one of the most devastating wars in U.S. history. If you love uncovering the untold stories of the American Old West, make sure to subscribe for more fascinating history because the past is wilder than you think. The Compromise of 1850. Following the Mexican-American War, a growing divide emerged between the North and South regarding the fate of newly acquired Western territories. The central question was whether these lands would permit slavery or remain free. The issue became particularly pressing in 1849 when California applied for statehood as a free state. If approved, this would have disrupted the balance of power that had been carefully maintained by the Missouri Compromise decades earlier. In an effort to ease tensions, Senator Henry Clay of Kentucky, a prominent Whig, introduced a series of legislative measures aimed at finding common ground. However, after months of debate, the Senate was unable to reach an agreement and ultimately rejected his proposal. This stalemate highlighted the deepening political divisions within the country. Seeking an alternative path forward, Senator Stephen A. Douglas of Illinois, a Democrat, introduced a revised plan. His proposal allowed California to enter the Union as a free state while granting Utah and New Mexico the ability to determine their stance on slavery through popular sovereignty. It also established clear boundaries for Texas, ended the slave trade in Washington, D.C., and reinforced federal enforcement of laws requiring the return of individuals who had escaped enslavement. Although these measures temporarily reduced immediate political friction, they did not provide a lasting solution. Instead, they reflected an ongoing pattern of postponing difficult decisions rather than directly addressing the root causes of disagreement. As historian Michael Green of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas explains, this agreement was less about true compromise and more about delaying an inevitable national crisis, the Kansas Nebraska Act. In 1854, Senator Stephen A. Douglas, who had played a key role in the Compromise of 1850, introduced new legislation to organize the Nebraska Territory. At the time, this vast region encompassed not only modern-day Nebraska, but also Kansas, Montana, and parts of the Dakotas, as noted in the U.S. Senate's historical records. Douglas was a strong advocate for a transcontinental railroad that would pass through Chicago, benefiting his home state of Illinois. However, the proposed Northern Railroad route had to cross the Nebraska Territory, where slavery had been prohibited under the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Meanwhile, those who supported slavery, particularly in the South, favored a more southern railroad route. To gain the necessary support, Douglas proposed a compromise, allowing settlers in these territories to determine for themselves whether to permit slavery. This proposal faced strong opposition, particularly from Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner, who criticized it for potentially enabling oppressive practices. Despite the controversy, Congress approved the measure, leading to significant consequences. By overturning previous restrictions on slavery's expansion into the West, the law unraveled a long-standing political agreement on the issue. As a result, both those who supported and opposed slavery moved into the new territories, hoping to influence the future of these regions. Competing interests led to significant unrest, particularly in Kansas, where tensions escalated in a series of conflicts that became known as Bleeding Kansas. This period marked a critical moment in the nation's growing divide, foreshadowing the deeper struggles that would eventually lead to the Civil War. The Fugitive Slave Act, a federal law passed by Congress in 1793, allowed local authorities to capture and return individuals who had escaped slavery. It also imposed penalties on anyone who assisted in their flight. However, the version included in the Compromise of 1850 introduced even stricter measures. This new law required all citizens to participate in capturing those who had escaped, regardless of their personal beliefs. It also denied the accused the right to a jury trial and increased penalties for those who provided assistance. Additionally, the legal process was placed in the hands of federal commissioners, who received $10 if they ruled in favor of returning an individual to slavery, but only $5 if they determined the person was free. The law faced immediate resistance from abolitionists in the North. In 1854, a major protest erupted in Boston after authorities arrested Anthony Burns, a black man accused of escaping from Virginia. An estimated 50,000 anti-slavery demonstrators gathered in the streets, demanding his release. In response, President Franklin Pierce deployed federal troops to maintain order and arranged for a Navy ship to transport Burns back to Virginia. For many in the North, this event was a turning point. Those who had long opposed slavery saw their concerns validated, while others who had previously remained neutral began questioning the increasing reach of federal authority on the issue. Historian Michael Green describes it as a moment of awakening for many Northerners. In response, Massachusetts and other free states passed personal liberty laws, making it more difficult for enslavers to present legal claims in court. The Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott was born into slavery in Virginia and later lived in Alabama and Missouri. In 1831, his original enslaver passed away, and he was subsequently purchased by John Emerson, a U.S. Army surgeon. Emerson later moved Scott to Illinois, a free state, and then to Wisconsin, where slavery had been prohibited under the Missouri Compromise. During his time in Wisconsin, Scott married, and he and his wife started a family, eventually having 4 children. In 1843, following Emerson's death, Scott and his wife sought legal action for their freedom. They argued in federal court that their residence in free territories should have granted them legal independence. The case was financially supported by the family of Scott's original owner and went through years of legal battles before reaching the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1857, Chief Justice Roger Taney delivered the court's ruling, which determined that Scott was not entitled to U.S. citizenship or the legal protections that came with it, regardless of where he had lived. The decision stated that, according to the original intent of the Constitution's framers, black individuals were not recognized as citizens, but were instead considered property under the law. The ruling deepened national divisions, making future political compromises increasingly difficult. It reinforced existing tensions between the North and South, further fueling the debate over slavery's expansion and contributing to the growing crisis that would eventually lead to the Civil War. The election of 1860. Abraham Lincoln, a self-taught lawyer who had previously served a single term in Congress, gained national recognition in the mid-1850s for his strong opposition to slavery. His prominence grew after a series of debates with Senator Stephen Douglas during an unsuccessful attempt to unseat him. Despite losing that race, Lincoln's ability to articulate his views on slavery and the future of the nation positioned him as a rising political figure. When the Republican Party held its convention to select a presidential nominee, the choice of Chicago as the location worked in Lincoln's favor. More established politicians, such as Senator William H. Seward of New York, faced challenges in securing widespread support. The way the convention floor was arranged also played a role. According to historian Michael Green, the Illinois delegation was strategically positioned to engage with undecided groups, while Seward's New York supporters were placed in a less accessible spot, making it harder for them to rally additional backing. Lincoln's path to the presidency was further shaped by divisions within the Democratic Party. Unable to unite behind a single candidate, Southern Democrats nominated John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky, while Northern Democrats supported Stephen Douglas. Additionally, John Bell of the Constitutional Union Party drew votes from the South, further splitting support. Meanwhile, Lincoln won nearly all the northeastern and midwestern states, with the exception of Missouri, which went to Douglas. He also secured victories in Oregon and California. Despite receiving just 40% of the popular vote, Lincoln won decisively in the Electoral College. For the first time, the system worked against the South, as the divided opposition allowed Lincoln to claim the presidency. His election, however, deepened sectional tensions, setting the stage for the secession crisis and the coming conflict, the formation of the Confederacy. The election of Abraham Lincoln, the first U.S. president to openly oppose the expansion of slavery, caused deep concern among many Southerners. For the first time, they faced a leader who would not automatically support their interests. Historian Michael Green explains that Southerners felt Lincoln could not be trusted, regardless of his assurances that he would protect their rights. Many believed his election was driven by people intent on undermining their way of life. Less than 6 weeks after the election, South Carolina held a secession convention in Charleston. Of the 169 delegates present, around 60% were enslavers, and they voted unanimously to leave the Union. The decision was met with widespread public celebrations, including bonfires, parades, and the ringing of church bells. Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana soon followed South Carolina's lead. In February 1861, representatives from these 6 states convened to form a new government, which they named the Confederate States of America. Jefferson Davis of Mississippi was elected as the Confederate president. The following month, Texas joined as well. The situation escalated in April when Confederate forces took control of Fort Sumter. In response, Lincoln called for federal troops to reclaim the fort. This prompted Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee to also secede, bringing the total number of Confederate states to 11. Ironically, the Confederacy's decision to leave the Union accelerated the very outcome they sought to avoid. If these states had remained, the institution of slavery might have persisted for much longer. Instead, a prolonged and destructive conflict reshaped the nation. Over the next 4 years, the war significantly impacted the South, resulted in over 650,000 casualties from both sides, and ultimately led to the emancipation of more than 3.9 million enslaved Black Americans. Uncle Tom's Cabin is published. In 1851, author Harriet Beecher Stowe, still mourning the loss of her 18-month-old son Samuel to cholera 2 years earlier, reached out to the publisher of the National Era, an abolitionist newspaper based in Washington, D.C. She offered to write a serialized story that would illustrate the cruelty of slavery. According to Stowe biographer Katie Griffiths, the author later reflected that her personal grief helped her empathize with enslaved mothers who had their children taken from them. Her story, published in 41 installments, significantly increased the paper's readership. Recognizing its impact, a Boston publisher decided to compile it into a 2-volume novel. Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly, was an immediate success, selling 300,000 copies within its first year. The book's widespread popularity fueled public debate and deepened divisions between the North and South. Many Northern readers were shocked by Stowe's depiction of slavery's brutality. Though a work of fiction, the novel was based on real-life accounts from formerly enslaved individuals and stories shared by abolitionists and those who had escaped slavery. In contrast, Southerners strongly rejected the book's portrayal of their society. Historian Michael Green notes that many felt it was an unfair attack, accusing Stowe and her supporters of turning public opinion against them. Years later, when Stowe visited the White House in 1862, President Abraham Lincoln reportedly greeted her with a memorable remark. "So this is the little lady who made this big war?" Pawadami Massacre. Among those who moved to Kansas during the mid-1850s was John Brown, a fervent abolitionist and devout religious figure. Brown had previously worked as a conductor on the Underground Railroad, helping enslaved individuals escape to freedom in Canada. His commitment to the abolitionist cause led him to relocate to the Kansas Territory, where tensions over slavery were escalating. In May 1856, Brown became deeply outraged when pro-slavery forces destroyed a newspaper office and other properties in Lawrence, Kansas, which was a center of anti-slavery sentiment. Feeling that justice had not been served, Brown resolved to take matters into his own hands. He gathered a group of supporters, including 4 of his sons, and set out to retaliate. They moved to a location near Pawadami Creek in Franklin, Kansas, where Brown and his followers allegedly lured 5 pro-slavery men out of their homes, promising them safety. However, the men were attacked with knives and sabers, and some were shot, according to accounts from the time. This violent act, which came to be known as the Pawadami Massacre, shocked both the North and the South, sparking widespread condemnation. Southern newspapers in particular decried Brown's actions, and some Northern outlets were also critical of the brutality. The incident served to escalate the already intense hostilities between pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions in Kansas. As noted by the Kansas Historical Society, the violence continued to grow, and the Bleeding Kansas conflict endured for another 2 years. The events surrounding Brown's actions revealed the deepening polarization of the nation and highlighted the increasing willingness of some individuals on both sides to resort to violence in their efforts to shape the future of the country. The legacy of these violent confrontations would later play a significant role in the lead-up to the Civil War. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. John Brown had long envisioned a grand plan, one that would spark a massive uprising among enslaved people in the South. His goal was to carry out an attack that would not only disrupt the institution of slavery, but also inspire enslaved individuals to rise up against their oppressors. Brown's bold ambition led him to devise an audacious raid. In October 1859, Brown and a small group of 22 men embarked on a daring mission to seize the Federal Armory in Harper's Ferry, a town located in what is now West Virginia. Their plan was to capture the weapons stored there and use them to arm enslaved people, hoping to ignite a widespread revolt. They also took several prominent local residents as hostages to ensure their success. However, the plan quickly unraveled when the group was met by a counter-offensive from local militia. Brown and his men were forced to retreat and take refuge in a nearby building. The situation worsened when U.S. Marines led by Colonel Robert E. Lee arrived the next day to suppress the uprising. They stormed the armory, resulting in the death of several of Brown's men, while others were taken into custody. Brown himself was captured, tried for treason, murder, and insurrection, and ultimately sentenced to death by hanging. His execution took place in December 1859. Although the raid failed to achieve the widespread rebellion Brown had envisioned, it had profound consequences for the nation. The event intensified the divisions between the North and South, further deepening the rift that would lead to the Civil War. In the North, Brown was regarded by many abolitionists as a martyr, someone who had sacrificed his life for the cause of freedom. Some even contributed financially to his raid, seeing him as a hero willing to take extreme measures for the abolition of slavery. On the other hand, Southerners viewed Brown's actions as a direct threat, fearing that more violent uprisings were imminent. In response, they began to strengthen their militias in anticipation of potential future attacks. Brown's raid, though unsuccessful in its immediate objectives, highlighted the growing tensions between the two regions. It can be seen as one of the first significant acts that foreshadowed the coming of the Civil War. as it vividly exposed the extreme lengths to which individuals on both sides were willing to go in defense of their beliefs regarding slavery. The raid solidified the perception that the nation was heading toward a violent and unavoidable conflict. As we look back at these 9 pivotal events that shaped the road to the Civil War, it's clear that the nation's growing divisions over slavery, states' rights, and economic disparities were more than just political disagreements. They were a ticking time bomb. Each event set the stage for a confrontation that would eventually ignite the deadliest conflict in American history. The ripple effects of these decisions continue to impact the nation to this day, making it all the more crucial to understand how we got here. If you found this history as fascinating as we do, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more deep dives into the events and people that helped shape the Old West in the United States. Join us on this journey through history. Your next great discovery is just a click away.